Bem-vindo ao Henrique Decoder Talks. To our viewers outside South America, a warm welcome. In this show, we will discuss topics related to Brazil, and while our focus is local, I'm confident these insights will resonate with you, especially if you are interested in investing, visiting, or doing business with Brazilians. Understanding our culture and the broader Brazilian mindset will equip you to navigate opportunities here more effectively. Let me be clear, Brazil isn't for the faint of heart. But stick with me to the end and beyond, and you will see why this country is worth your time, curiosity, and ambition. Stay tuned. This journey will redefine how you see Brazil.
Brazil appears poised to confront a future shaped by escalating judicial authoritarianism and deepening political polarization. Alexandre de Moraes, a justice of the Supreme Federal Court, STF, has consolidated his influence through practices critics describe as censorship and politically motivated persecution. This trajectory risks further destabilization when considering the unintended consequences of U.S. sanctions, often misperceived as purely punitive, which may paradoxically strengthen state control by deterring foreign investment. Such capital flight evokes historical parallels to Cuba and Venezuela, where economic isolation entrenched authoritarian regimes. Recent developments suggest Tarcísio de Freitas, the governor of São Paulo, could emerge as a presidential candidate in 2026. This possibility stems from the fragmentation of Brazil's right-wing movement, exacerbated by the potential imprisonment of former President Jair Bolsonaro. Bolsonaro faces up to 40 years in prison for alleged involvement in a coup attempt, a case critics argue lacks robust evidence. Meanwhile, U.S. sanctions comparable to those imposed on Venezuela and Cuba threaten to deepen Brazil's economic crisis, creating fertile ground for electoral fraud and corruption. Skepticism around electronic voting systems persists, and without direct U.S. military intervention, historically reserved for protecting strategic interests, the nation risks sliding into tyranny, further weakening its populace and economy. To contextualize these claims, I emphasize that the following analysis reflects my personal viewpoints, though grounded in cited sources. The roots of this crisis trace back to 2017, when then-interim President Michel Temer, embroiled in scandals, including alleged ties to Freemasonry, appointed Alexandre de Moraes to the STF. Moraes, himself linked to Masonic networks, faced speculation that his nomination was part of a quid pro quo involving Temer's wife's hacked phone. However, I argue this episode is merely one thread in a broader tapestry of global power dynamics, possibly involving the CIA and a purported deep state, manipulating Brazil, a nation often derided as a banana republic, due to systemic corruption. These dynamics resurfaced in recent investigations implicating USAID in electoral interference. Under a weakened government, Brazil has entered an era of judicial overreach, with Moraes leveraging his authority to investigate and silence opposition. This trend intensified after the 2023 congressional protests linked to Bolsonaro, a narrative critics deem a fabrication. Investigations led by factions of the federal police and public prosecutor's office accused of corruption have advanced what Olavo de Carvalho, 2015, termed a perverse ideology aimed at entrenching radical leftist parties. In the Garden of Afflictions, Carvalho posits that Brazilians suffer a colonial herd mentality, fostering submission to centralized power and self-interest over collective good, a mindset rooted in an internalized inferiority complex. Carvalho, 2019. A chilling example of state overreach occurred during the 2023 protests, when security forces herded demonstrators into makeshift detention centers under false pretenses, separating families and confiscating children. Tactics critics liken to Nazi-era deceptions. Such actions underscore a regime willing to manipulate citizens into complicity, mirroring historical authoritarian playbooks. Key questions remain unanswered. Why were no weapons found among alleged coup participants? Why were due process rights, such as the principle of natural judge, disregarded? How can a coup plot exist without organizational structure? The notion of an unarmed mob overthrowing a government strains credibility, yet it forms the basis of ongoing prosecutions. By 2025, Moraes solidified his role as Brazil's de facto political arbiter. His decisions to block platforms like X, formerly Twitter, and Telegram, ostensibly to combat disinformation, ignited debates over censorship versus democracy. Critics argue this judicial activism masks authoritarianism, exemplified by fines imposed on unrelated businesses within conglomerates, eroding legal certainty. Internationally, the U.S. under re-elected President Donald Trump responded with sanctions like the No Censors on Our Shores Act in 2025, mirroring measures against Venezuela and North Korea. While targeting Moraes, these sanctions worsened Brazil's economy, already strained by President Lula's fragmented reforms and ideological divisions. This episode illustrates how one figure's actions can ripple globally, destabilizing diplomacy and markets. Bolsonaro's impending trial, a media spectacle lacking procedural rigor, may result in a 40-year sentence for allegedly masterminding a 2022 coup. His potential martyrdom could galvanize supporters while creating a vacuum for figures like Tarcísio de Freitas, whose 61% approval rating, 2025, positions him as a pragmatic unifier. However, Tarcísio's ambivalence toward institutional crises suggests opportunism, enabling authoritarianism under a veneer of renewed democracy. Electoral manipulation looms large. Despite recurring doubts about electronic voting and the Tribunal Superior Eleitoral's (TC) oversight, the left struggles to regain power. A Tarcísio presidency, potentially marred by fraud, would align with manipulated polls and media narratives, perpetuating a cycle of illegitimacy. Brazil's bloated bureaucracy, a labyrinth of inefficiency and embezzlement, diverts public funds to regime propaganda, poverty-perpetuating social programs, and aligned artists, epitomizing a modern bread and circuses strategy. Educational neglect exacerbates this. Underfunded schools produce citizens unequipped to challenge the status quo, while academics dependent on state grants recycle outdated theories. This mirrors totalitarian models from Nazi Germany to modern China, where propaganda and surveillance ensure compliance. Brazil's collective hypocrisy echoes historical moral collapses. Many citizens tacitly endorse corruption for personal gain, ignoring its impact on the marginalized. Debates on race, environment, and gender often distract from structural inequality, a tactic reminiscent of Venezuela's diversionary tactics under Maduro. As Olavo de Carvalho noted, Brazil's colonial herd mentality fosters subservience to power and self-interest, a legacy of internalized inferiority, Carvalho, 2019. The Jaitinho, or shortcut culture, reflects survival in a state resembling a machine distributing privileges to bureaucratic elites, akin to decadent Rome. Collective cowardice substitutes freedom for state paternalism. During the 2023 protests, citizens posed for selfies with soldiers instead of demanding military action, of patriotic alienation, mirroring Nazi Germany's passive complicity. Even rebellion becomes spectacle. Protests devolve into festivals with branded t-shirts, yet no one risks political suicide for meaningful change. Brazilian utilitarianism, paired with a lack of tragic sense, as Carvalho says, oscillates between fleeting enthusiasm and apathy. Like Venezuela's reliance on collectivist messiahs, Brazilians await salvation by charismatic leaders rather than embracing civic agency. Trapped between state-sponsored distractions and hollow promises, the nation replays crises, a tragicomic loop where even tragedy becomes a social media meme. By 2026, Brazil risks cementing authoritarianism under democratic facades, with electoral manipulation and civic alienation threatening popular sovereignty. Breaking this cycle demands educational reform fostering critical thinking, institutional reinforcement, and civic engagement. Without such transformation, Brazil remains captive to its contradictions, serving oligarchic interests at the majority's expense. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. Leave your comments below.